a dire warning coming from some of the nation's top military commanders. Sources now say that the U.S. has gone through a dramatically high amount of a key weapon in just the past 6 months during the war with Iran. CNN senior national security reporter Zach Cohen is a part of the team that is behind this reporting. So, Zach, what are you and our colleagues learning?
Yeah, Casey, we're told that the U.S. military has actually burned through more of its stockpile of key munitions than we previously thought, and it's prompting senior military commanders to issue warnings that those levels, those inventory levels, are now dangerously low. That was a quote from one of the sources to me, Jim Sciutto and Haley Britsky. And look, specifically, we're told that 80% of the U.S. stockpile of interceptors for a key air defense system known as THAAD, that those have been used up during the Iran war so far, just in 5 months of this conflict. And that's a staggering number. That's higher than the percentage that we had believed was true just weeks ago, where it was more around 60%. But that is an important system because it's the primary means, along with Patriot missiles, that the U.S. is able to counter and take down ballistic missiles. And it's not just used by the U.S. military, it's also used by some of its key allies, including some in the Middle East, namely Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And so we're also told, in addition to those staggering low number of THAAD left in the U.S. stockpiles, that the U.S. has also gone through 50% of its Patriot interceptors. And to put that in perspective, the U.S. had about 2,000 Patriot missiles in its inventory before the war started. It has about half that number now. And so we've known that this is a concern that's been raised by General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, in these meetings with President Trump, where they've discussed options for potentially escalating the conflict. We know that Gulf countries in particular have voiced concerns also about how this stockpile shortage might impact their ability to defend themselves against Iranian retaliation if Trump does move forward with some sort of an escalation. So this is an important thread to watch, and one that's been a persistent concern for weeks now.
Joining me now, CNN senior military analyst and former NATO Supreme Allied Commander, retired Admiral James Stavridis. Thank you so much for being here. If indeed nearly 80% of THAAD and half of our Patriot missile stock is gone since the Iran war began, how would you describe that? What does that mean?
Dangerous, in one word. And it's not only dangerous in the context of the Middle East, Sarah. It's dangerous in the context of Ukraine and dangerous in the context of Taiwan. Let me explain. What we're talking about here, and you're showing a picture of some of these ground-to-air defense missiles that go up and shoot down incoming ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles even. And if it is true, and you have to factor into this the denials from the Pentagon that are coming out, but if it's true that we're down 80%, we will be unable to fully help our allies in the Gulf, the Arab countries, and Israel defend themselves. We will be unable to provide any air defense interceptors to Ukraine, which will mean their war against Russia will go less well. And we will not have interceptors available to deter China. So bottom line, if this is true, these numbers, it's dangerous. And I know the combatant commanders around the world, which I used to be both in Europe and in Latin America, are very concerned.
I do want to ask you about just how long it takes to replenish, to rebuild some of these munitions, and what that also means, because in the meantime, Iran is using cheaply made things like drones to combat very expensive equipment that the United States is having to use. Give us some sense of the timeline of trying to replenish these.
You've put your finger on the real problem here. And by the way, it's not just air defense weapons. There are credible reports that some of our precision strike weapons, offensive weapons, like ATACMS, like Tomahawk missiles, like precision strike missiles, these are also being depleted. So the problem, as you correctly point out, Sarah, is not only are they very expensive, but they are also long timelines to replenish. So you're not talking weeks, you're not talking months, you're talking years to rebuild these inventories. Now, the Pentagon is keenly aware of this aspect of things, is pushing the defense industrial base very hard to accelerate all this. We've done this before in other conflicts, but that's a challenge. Time is of the essence here. Joining us now to discuss, Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, who sits on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator, thank you so much for being here in the arena. I want to first start with that reporting that Zach just laid out there about the level to which these stockpiles have been depleted. What are the implications in your view?
Well, Casey, thanks for a chance to be on again. The implications of a real challenge to what's called our magazine depth, or the number of our precision strike missiles and our interceptors, is that it weakens the United States. It weakens our hand in being prepared to defend our treaty allies in the Western Pacific, to defend our homeland, and to defend our critical allies and partners in Europe and the Middle East. This is not a new problem. We have had challenges with procuring these expensive, exquisite munitions for a long time. Last year's appropriations bill, where I'm the senior Democrat for defense appropriations, we authorized multi-year procurement of several key munitions and moved billions of dollars into those lines. Frankly, when the president chose to launch a war of choice more than 5 months ago in the Middle East, one of the challenges I am certain that his senior military advisors briefed him on was that the Iranians were going to launch thousands of cheap, lethal drones at our facilities, our bases, our embassies, and our allies and partners, and we would use incredibly expensive, exquisite, and rare munitions to intercept them or to defend against them with counterstrikes. So this is a challenge we have faced for some time. Countries like Iran have learned how to make drones that cost relatively little, and we are still using very expensive munitions to stop them.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth is denying CNN's reporting. He's saying it's not true. He's saying we don't hate the fake news media enough. Now, Gulf allies, however, are raising concerns about how the shortage could impact their ability to defend against Iranian retaliation if President Trump decides to, say, escalate the ongoing conflict. And adding to the urgency, Iran is now threatening to attack U.S. vessels in the region. So we're bringing in Becca Wasser to the group chat. She's the defense lead at Bloomberg Economics. Okay, so we've got the head of the military saying it's not true. There is no shortage or diminished supply. What say you? What do people know in the world of military analysts?
All right, so the U.S. isn't out of missiles, but it is running incredibly low of certain types of missiles. So it is running dangerously low of air defense interceptors, those THAAD interceptors, Patriot, and those are needed to protect U.S. forces, U.S. allies, and the American homeland.
And to clarify, because especially in Iran, where they're shooting off really cheap drones, they shoot off their cheap drone that's like $30,000, and then we use our very expensive missiles to shoot that down.
To shoot them down. And usually this is missile-to-missile ballistic defense as opposed to counter-drone defenses at this juncture in time. But those are incredibly important. And then the U.S. is also running low of some of its long-range standoff munitions, the missiles that it uses to essentially prosecute war from afar and keep forces safe. And so all of this matters is because whenever you put forward a potential operation, let's say if President Trump decided he wanted options for escalation again, you have to say what is the risk to mission and what are the risks to forces. And without some of those critical air defense interceptors and some of those other long-range munitions, that risk to forces grows enormously.
The thing I've been hearing, though, is munitions are made to be used, and we are in a war. We are also here and there, when we decide to, helping Ukraine, right, in its war against Russia. So is it the concern that this is a problem for the war we are in right now, or is it, what I often hear, this sort of future scenario around Asia and China in the Indo-Pacific?
It's both. Right now, the U.S. is probably constrained in its operational options in Iran.
Wait, say that in English. Constrained in its operational...
Constrained in what it can do. So if President Trump says, bring me options for the next phase of the war, some of those options are going to be a lot more limited than they were a few days ago. And then if we're looking for, the U.S. global role, the U.S. doesn't have enough missiles and munitions to protect itself and its allies. Plus, if you're looking to future conflict, these missiles take years and years to build. This is a generational gap that cannot be overcome in a short amount of time, and that has major implications for U.S. military power and security around the globe.